Good morning, everyone. We are Fundright, and we are working towards building consumer models for applications in factoring with the help of Professor Peter Fader. Our team consists of Braden, Alec, Raouf, and myself, Christina. Non-profits are like any other business. They have revenues, assets, cash flows, and liabilities. The key difference between non-profit and for-profit organizations is that consumer behavior is predictable, but donations are not. According to Science Journal, 93% of all consumer behavior is predictable. Unfortunately, donations fall within this unpredictable 7%. So, in a market worth $410 billion of donations, $290 billion comes from individuals. This means that 70% of a multi-billion-dollar market appears random. This is for two key reasons. Firstly, of those who do give, only 1% become repeat donors. And secondly, those who do give are often motivated by external factors such as tax deductions. So when a nonprofit goes to a bank to request a loan, a bank sees this randomness, which results in them offering interest rates ranging from 20 to 50%. A nonprofit is unable to collateralize these loans with things such as recurring donations, reliable projections, or endowments, which means that they are forced to accept these extremely high interest rates.
And this is exactly what happened to Jane. Jane is the hypothetical director of a small nonprofit based here in the US. Last year, Jane walked into a bank requesting a loan for her organization. Upon reviewing her organization's financial statements, the bank got back to her and told her, "We're willing to extend you a loan. However, it would be one that carries a 35% interest rate." Frustrated, and rightly so, Jane didn't know what to do. After all, her organization has a fleet of volunteers, hundreds, maybe even thousands of supporters. So how is it that an organization this big is not able to have access to appropriate, decent, quality financing? In the bank's defense, however, neither is the bank, nor Jane, nor her organization able to tell the difference between repeat donors, those who donate on a daily, monthly, maybe even yearly basis, and those who are just volunteers.
So to solve this problem, we partnered with an organization called Flourish. They process microdonations. They have the ability to determine who's going to become a repeat donor and who isn't. Flourish allows donors to round up their spare change, so each transaction, rounded to the nearest dollar, is given to the organization. Through this process, they accumulate hundreds of data points for each donor, indicating when they're going to give next. But to date, other than processing donations, they don't know what to do with it. So we've taken this information and thought of it differently. We've looked at a granular level, looking at each individual donor, trying to create a donation propensity, or how likely any given person is to give on any given day. So we do this taking into account a suite of covariates and variables into our models, including recency, frequency, amount, which is how often, how reliably, and how much do you give over a period of time. In addition, we look at sex. We look at location, urban or rural. We look at spending patterns, so how large are the transactions you're making, to determine things like net worth. Do you live in the middle of New York City, or do you live on a farm in the middle of Nebraska? Things like that are highly dependent on the likelihood that you continue to give over a period of time. So taking all these covariates into account, we put them through modified negative binomial distributions and ultimately regressions that output this prediction, this donation propensity, telling us how likely any person in Jane's supporter group will give on any given day. So what this looks like from a decision process is we take the transaction table and the user-specific variables that Flourish has access to. We put them into NVD modeling, as I mentioned, then ultimately implementing this in both Python and Excel for confirmation, which comes out on a kind of a loan decision process. What we think these donors are going to give over a period of time, meaning that we have insight into what top-line revenue is going to look like for a nonprofit. Ultimately, this is exported into a website, to a final product that Alec will show you later, that is indicative of what a nonprofit would see as they go through this process. Using all of this information, ultimately what we're trying to do is correctly price the risk that these nonprofits have. So instead of Jane walking into a bank and getting a loan for 35%, we can correctly see this confidence interval over a period of time, the gray shaded area, and the ultimate donation flow, the orange line that's growing, over the days of an active loan. What this means, and as we're able to tighten this, is that we can correctly price her risk, offering Jane that same loan for between 8 and 15% with a high degree of confidence instead of a bank's 20 to 50.
So this is a look at our live demo at our website. So when Jane comes in and asks for, let's say, $10,000, she's just going to see that we're willing to give her that money, and then for the following 142 days, we will capture her donation stream. There is no collateralizing of a loan, which is great for a nonprofit because often they don't have a lot of hard assets that they can put up as collateral. On our end, we see an expected payoff with confidence intervals around it, and we also see the segment breakdown of Jane's donor base so that we have a much better idea of what the risk profile actually looks like, what the donor base really looks like for a specific organization. At the end of the day, when we ran our models on a 40 loan portfolio with out of sample data, we were accurate 87% of the time, meaning that we were either break even or profitable. With this, we had variance constrained to less than 10%, and we had an ROI target of about 10%. So we were just trying to extend that factoring period for just a few extra days to make a delta. In terms of ethical issues that we faced along the way, we were working in the nonprofit sector. Versus the for-profit sector, they don't always have their eye on the bottom line in the same way. This means that we have to be extra careful to make sure not to take advantage when we're offering this financial product, which means a high level of transparency in the number of days that we're factoring and our target ROI. We need to make sure that this product remains mutually beneficial for both sides of the table. The last issue we faced was making sure that we could process all of this data and get everything we needed to out of it without violating any privacy issues. So to do this, we encrypted all of our data so that we could track an individual user over time and understand their behavior without tracing it back to a specific identity. We believe that a factoring model provided by Fundright would allow nonprofits to unlock their potential by ensuring that they can get money when they want it in the amount that they need at significantly lower interest rates than banks can currently offer them, without having to offer up any level of collateral, which is often a huge, huge barrier for these organizations. Thank you very much, and we're now happy to take any questions.
So I didn't quite follow it entirely. So Jane's organization, all funding into Jane's organization is going to happen through some app?
Not necessarily. So it's a portion. Ultimately, what the platform that's currently in the market is doing is they're just processing an incremental donation revenue, so a small piece of it. What we've been able to do is see this predictability within that donor population, which augments other kind of loan decision processes in place that would allow Jane to go out and get the $10,000 loan at 8 to 15% as opposed to 20 to 50%, which is currently done in the market. So it's data insights.
Her donors aren't being tracked, just representative donors, if that's sort of being tracked?
So the idea is to grow the pipeline as big as possible because the data that this third party has is way more valuable than the data that Jane's generating internally. But it can be augmented. It doesn't have to be all from one or all from the other.
So the idea that you're doing this like factoring, you give her $10,000 and she gives you all.
Exactly, and so the reason, and Alec touched on it, is because a lot of times these organizations own the computers they work on, maybe the chairs they sit in, but they don't have assets to collateralize with. And so currently, without collateralization, banks get kind of all up in arms that there's no safety net. And so we've taken the approach of let's throw that hurdle out of the window and instead focus on accuracy and predictability.
So you give her $10,000 in advance, and then you collect. There's a bit of a adverse selection criteria here, right? Because if she knows that she's already gotten the money, that she's going to have to collect donors for the next, 6 or 8 months, she has no incentive to do any donation activity, right? Because you're going to get that money.
Absolutely, but at the same time, while it is a complete risk transfer, it is 100% on kind of Fundright or our end. It aligns motivations in such a way that essentially that gives Jane full confidence in her future.
Right, but it doesn't give you any confidence, right? What I'm saying is she gets the money, and now you have to rely on her to collect donations. I'm sure that, these organizations, they don't just sit still, right? They do fundraising activity, and since she's pledged all of her future donations to you guys, she has no incentive to continue doing that work.
So I think a majority of Jane's donors would be roundup donors or donors who are making passive donations every day or every month or every year. So it's like you go to Starbucks, you pay $3.75 for a latte. Instead, if you're part of this app, you're paying $4. You don't know that you're paying $4, but at the end of the day, the 25-cent differential would be donated towards Jane's organization. Well, this is what we're basing our model off of. So it's only upside optionality from here. The downside is...
And would it be limited to a period of time or a certain number of dollars?
Both, more than likely. It'd probably be, we've looked at, to Alex's point, if you're giving money ahead of time, an ROI does need to be built in. And so we're looking at the sooner of principal plus 10% or the time frame. So if the time frame occurs and the principal plus 10% hasn't been made or a loss has occurred, that's fully on our end. It's a complete risk transfer. However, if over the period of time they receive 200% or 2,000%, it doesn't feel right to take that delta. Yeah, out of a loan of 40 loan portfolio over a simulated 12-month period. Yep.
I'm just curious, it seems to me, have you looked into or considered that other than loan applications, this might be something that nonprofits would be able to use to better budget for themselves and make plans and potentially understand better timing for when to have fundraisers and things like that based on giving back? Have you considered that angle at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's absolutely been a piece of the conversation with the organizations we've been working with over the last 12 months. As we've spoken to them, it tends to be these super tight cash constrained windows that they're really stressed about. And so it's I need to put $10,000 to hold my spot at the venue for my annual gala, and I know I'm gonna make $10,000 at the day, but $10,000 is 2 heads for payroll for the next 2 months. And so it's those type of windows that tend to be the most stressful, not necessarily how are we gonna put this in between and intersperse this with annual giving campaigns. Does that make sense?
Do you know what kind of percentage of NGO income comes from these small donations that you can predict would really rise? Because I assume with the application that you're partnering with, because I assume that many of the donations that support larger NGOs are single donations with much larger sums. So can you still predict those donations or just see how many roundup donations happen?
Kind of yes and no is really the response. So nonprofit, there are about 1.5 million organizations in the country, so a ton of them. Very similar to for-profit, there are the handful of really, really big ones, Penn, Wounded Warrior Project, Habitat for Humanity, Red Cross, things like that. They're funded by giant corporate partnerships. They're funded, the majority of their kind of fixed costs are covered by huge donations or very, very large endowments. There's about a 70+% of the market, or about 900,000 organizations that do less than $5 million in annual operating, don't have endowments, and have a head count of between 4 and 10, where their large donations cover fixed costs, but almost 100% of their programmatic spend each year comes from less than $1,000 donations. So while yes, you can kind of use it as a proxy to predict these things, that doesn't tend to be where, again, these cash constraints really come into play. It's, do I have the capital to cover the program I'm launching next month that'll last 6 months, as opposed to, do I have the capital to pay for my rent? So it's a different use case.
How do you look at the risk? Is the risk level about the same for the bank that's providing the loan, or for the nonprofit that's taking it?
As far as upside, downside, or in what sense?
I'm thinking from the bank perspective. Suppose the market suddenly changes. Then it's much more they, how confident are you that the predictability is going to carry through and become something that repeats itself?
Yeah, I mean, that's an externality that any loan officer faces when giving a loan to a house or underwriting a car. I mean, it's a factor that is baked in to kind of statisticians over the last 200 years, giving loans in general. For this perspective, it's more of, because it's a complete risk transfer, because it's 100% risk, there is higher ups, there is an increased risk profile. However, there's also higher upside because of the variability of how much profit could be made on a given loan. Does that make sense? And so you're offsetting your increased risk by your increased gain. And so in doing so, it's a way that financiers and banks feel comfortable with that is just kind of outside of their normal thought process. Does that make sense? Thank you. Thank you all.